Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of Ways and Means Committee. I'm John Quincy, Chair of the committee, joined by committee members Yang, Palmisano, Bender, Andrew Johnson, and Council Vice President Elizabeth Glidden. We have a pretty extensive agenda today, so I'm going to begin by going through the consent items. I think there are 35 on consent. Just briefly touch on those. We have a series of legal settlements. Item number 2 is a probation officer services contract. Convention Center is bringing forward the Visitor Information Center contract closeout for their project. Finance and Property Services is bringing forward a contract increase with JPMI Construction Company for fire stations 5 and 7. As well as a merchant services contract extends the contract of 6 months. We have a flower exchange lease, approving negotiation and execution of that lease contract. We have the lease negotiation and execution for Hamilton School. Capital Long Range Improvement Committee appointments are outlined there. We also have a number 9, which is a receive and file for the 2015 Capital Long Range Improvement Committee schedule and guidelines. Items beginning at number 10 is from the Information Technology Department. This is for Minneapolis Wireless Community application for 2 free wireless community accounts. Also the Emergency Response Tracking System. We're approving the termination of a contract with Granicus for the Legislative Information Management System. We have increase of a contract for the Emergency Operations Fire Training Burn Simulator, accepting gifts for ServiceNow Knowledge 15 Technology Conference. And we have a land sale from Community Development Regulatory Services Committee. Number 15 is the land sale from Mill City Quarter and Abatron. Number 16 is the contract extension for Conurbation LLC. I wanted to note on number 17, this is the Director's Fee Schedule Ordinance. We're referring this item to staff for subject matter for the ordinance that was been introduced. From the Executive Committee, we have the 2015 salary adjustment for non-represented employees. And the number 19 is the 2015 salary adjustment for politically appointed employees. Number 20 is involved a tentative agreement with 911 Dispatchers Unit, labor negotiation, as well as a labor negotiation tentative agreement with laborers, Local 363. Health, Environment, and Community Engagement brings forward item number 22, which is the Minnesota Department of Health grant for supplemental Ebola funding. Number 23 is on the agenda is for the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization grant. Transportation and Public Works brings forward items number 24, resurfacing project. 25 is the MRI contract. Negotiation execution of the contract with Minneapolis Refuge, Inc. They also have the authorized execution of a contract with Wax Water Service for leakage assessment services contract. The St. Anthony Parkway Bridge over BNSF Northtown Yard project. The 7th Street Transit Advantage project. Stormwater sewer cleaning contract. Central Corridor LRT project subordinate funding agreement, funding for Bike Week events, and number 32 is the Open Streets 2015 approval of locations and budget. This came from Transportation and Public Works Committee. Let's see, number 33 is a series of low responsive bids and single bids for a variety of construction-related projects. Number 34 is the on-street parking mobile phone payment system. And number 35 is the Minneapolis street lighting policy revision. We have 2 discussion items, but I think we also have an addendum that I'm going to put on the consent agenda for our consideration. It's setting a public hearing for April 13th in this committee for the Cable Communications Franchise Ordinance. Are there any questions or comments on those items on the consent agenda, those 36 items? We have Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on items 31 and 32 together.
Okay.
I'm not looking to take this off of the consent agenda. I had a long discussion with it at TPW. I'm looking to be better about this process in the future by being able to convene a temporary work group to explore policy amendments that might affect budgeting for these kinds of events in the future. I'd like to include someone from the mayor's office and as well as from the different staff departments that are working out here. So I just wanted to flag that item as I plan to talk about it at committee of the whole pending the council vice president's approval for that discussion.
Okay.
Thanks.
Did you have anything on the other item on related to Bike Week, or is that all related?
That's all related.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment on item number 9 related to the capital long-range improvement schedule and guidelines. Obviously, it's a very important committee. I believe the council didn't make any amendments to their recommendations that came before us to over $100 million in capital spending over last year. One of the things that I'd like to see change going into next year, and I would hope that we can work on, is particular to the schedule. We've had a lot of trouble recruiting a diverse body or diverse members of that group, at least I have. And I think one of the reasons why is that a lot of these days that they're working, they'll have both during a work week, they'll have an entire day that is required of them. They'll have, for instance, a number of these days they have to be at City Hall from noon to 2 p.m., which really limits the amount of individuals who can participate in something like CLIC. And I understand that there's a lot of work before the body as well, and it's always going to be hard, right? People are going to have conflicts in the evening as well. But I think it definitely narrows it down to who can get out of work for more than 2 hours over lunch and at the same time be downtown in Minneapolis. So heavily people that are already working downtown, that are salaried, that happen to be in specific fields, oftentimes where they have that kind of work flexibility. So I really hope for 2016 we can find something that is more accommodating to the majority of residents in our city. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just picking up on that, I think that's a great idea, but I think there's also things we could do to, outside of the formal CLIC appointees, open up that process to more people in the city who want to get involved. And there's a small change coming forward this cycle that went through the Zoning and Planning Committee related to CLIC, and that's specifically to our capital programming for arts. And that was from the staff direction that I gave during the budget. So the new proposals for our public art funding to be on a 5-year cycle, but it's also aligned differently with our CLIC process in a way that invites artists to become more involved in the projects that are recommended from CLIC and reviewing what's coming out of CLIC. And I think that's a great example of one way that we can better align more community engagement, more broad engagement through our CLIC process. So I think that's a great suggestion from Councilmember Johnson, and I'm also interested in looking at some other ways that we can involve more people in our capital budgeting.
Thank you for that. Okay, seeing no further comments or questions on those consent items, I've got, I think there are 35 items. We're looking for approval of the 33 items with referral of staff on number 17 and receive and file on number 19. All those in favor of those actions as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those items are brought forward. Thank you very much, everyone. Especially if there's a lot of staff. That was a pretty robust agenda item. So thank you for all their work bringing those forward. I guess we'll move to our next agenda item, which is the discussion on Target Center renovation, modification of terms being brought forward by staff. This item was heard, of course, in the Community Development Regulatory Services Committee, and this gives this committee an opportunity to talk about some of the financial implications associated with that action. So if we could invite Mr. Carpenter to begin, and also wanted to note, of course, Mr. Johnson is here from the Convention Center, as well as City Coordinator Spencer Crunk, if further discussion needs to happen, we'll invite those people up. Mr. Carpenter, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As we presented in more detail at CDRS last week, before you is an RCA that describes a set of proposed modifications to the business terms of the Target Center renovation project. Those are, to remind all, modifications to an overall term sheet that was approved by council in November of 2013, by which staff were also authorized to execute a renovation agreement consistent with those approved terms. If the modifications that are before you today are approved, the key financial consequences of those modifications are as follows. The private parties, the team, i.e. Timberwolves Links and AEG, will now be financing their share of the renovation on their own. That means the city will issue fewer GO bonds than previously anticipated, as we will only be bonding for our share of the project costs rather than the total project. However, because the city's share of the overall project costs increase from 50 million to roughly 75 million, the annual debt service costs, because we will be bonding to provide the financing for that contribution. The annual debt service costs will in fact go up from what we were anticipating, all else being equal, assuming interest rates don't plummet dramatically. At the current time, we estimate that increased annual debt service cost number to the city will be between $500,000 and $1 million a year. But again, that will all depend ultimately on the interest rates at the time we issue the bonds. As a reminder, the anticipated source of revenue to be used for the repayment of those those debt service obligations are the 4 hospitality taxes or convention center taxes, or whatever rubric we want to use to describe the 4 taxes that include the half-cent citywide sales tax, the lodging tax, and each of the downtown restaurant and downtown liquor taxes, the 3%. While those taxes and that revenue source would be expected to contribute this delta of increased debt service costs in the order of magnitude, let's use $1 million, it is staff's opinion that since the aggregate magnitude of those taxes being collected in the last few years has ranged from $50 to $60 million on an upward slope, that it will not overly burden the use of those taxes to do everything else we want to do with those taxes, which includes funding the convention center, both its existing debt and its operating subsidy, Minneapolis, and a variety of other projects and activities. The other major financial consequence of the modifications is the reduction in the level of the city's contractual commitment to fund ongoing capital into the Target Center. The approved term sheet had the city on the hook for $50 million over time, obligated capital investment. The modification proposes $20 million over the next 20 years. I want to be clear that that is our contractual obligation. It is not a presupposition that that's all we will put in capital to the Target Center. However, the financial value of having that extra flexibility in future years allows future councils, advised by staff, to take into account the then current resource situation for the city, all different parts of that equation, as well as all sorts of the priorities, what we want to fund, when we want to fund it. So from the value of the flexibility is a key financial change and has consequences that are important to the city's long-term financial health. If approved, these sets of modifications will continue to authorize us to execute a renovation agreement, and we will be back to council later in the summer or early fall with motions to accept and execute a GMP construction contract, as well as to get the bonding authorizations that would be necessary for us to go out and raise the money to put into the project. With that, those are the major financial consequences. I stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carpenter. I did want to note we've been joined by Councilmember Jacob Fry, as well as Council President Johnson. So feel free to join the conversation, ask questions as you see fit. First question I think we have, it's a complicated issue. A lot of research has been going on, but we do have a question from Councilmember Bender, and we can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this information is available, in our budget book and other places, but I wondered if you could very simply for the public and for the committee members, describe the financial inputs and outputs of this cost to the city. And could you do that starting with the status quo? So
Yep.
Our annual expenses today and our annual revenues today.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bemmer, in its simplest form, which is pretty low bar to begin with because this is not simple, the existing situation in terms of the city's financial commitments to the Target Center comes in two forms. The Target Center, as it sits now, has about $45 million in outstanding debt principal related to the acquisition of the arena many, many years ago, subsequently refinanced, but the existing principal is about $45 million. That obligation to pay it down accumulates to more than $45 million because there's interest attached, and it goes until 2025. The revenue source that we use to pay that debt service is a combination of a portion of the TIF revenues from the consolidated TIF district, as well as a portion of the common project TIF district. Although the timing in each year doesn't work out precisely correctly, those TIFs expire at different times before the end of the bonds. The money coming off the TIF is basically exactly comparable to the debt service, the existing debt service. So we, for all intents and purposes, take those revenues, put them aside, pay debt service out of that kitty, if you will, and the revenue equals the debt service, and that piece is taken care of. Item 2, as it sits now, is
Could you estimate the annual expenditure of that? I understand that it's out of the TIF, but
I believe on average the annual debt service cost is for the next 10 years probably plus or minus $5 million, $4 million in some, 6 and later. Item 2, as it relates to existing, how the financial situation with the arena works, goes to the ongoing operations and the ongoing capital investments on a small scale, the annual maintenance and equipment kind of obligations. So there's really a 2A and a 2B. One is the operations. When AEG was pursuant to the RFP in 2007, when we selected AEG to be our operator, we entered into an operating agreement with AEG that delineated the flow of revenues and the accountabilities for expenses. Pursuant to that agreement, the city has what is called an operator reimbursement obligation that is roughly $1.5 million a year. Then through the year, there's a very complicated formula of all the revenues that come into the arena, profit and loss statement, and the expenses that come out of it. If at the end of the year there is a bottom line profit, there is a formula by which AEG and the city share in the profits, should there be any. In the recent history, there have been years when there have been profits, and the city has received, in effect, a rebate on its operator reimbursement. It has not been material, which also means that AEG is not making a lot of money at the bottom line on the arena. That is all what I would call base operations. At the same time, separately but linked, the city, through the annual budgeting process, makes a decision about that year's capital investments into the target center. In recent years, that has been as low as $2 million, I think, and as high as $5.5 million. You put all of that together, the operating reimbursement, and let's assume there's no profit sharing, so let's use $1.5 million and $4 million of capital investment. We fund those expenses, for lack of a better word, through three primary sources. The entertainment tax from events at the arena, which we are able to track precisely because we are the owner and AEG on our behalf operates the arena, is fed back into this model as the funding source for a portion of this ongoing expense. The last few years before 2014, that number amounted to, I think, about $1.3 million. In 2014, that number was closer to $2 million. Secondly, as a source, we use the team's rent payment. That is currently $1.35 million a year and is scheduled to inflate at 2%, I believe, over the term of their existing lease. So there's another source of revenue that comes into this. The third set of revenues that contribute to funding the operations are parking revenues that are deemed attributable broadly to events in the target center arena. It is true that we do not have a mechanism to precisely capture whether a person who is parking in ABC ramps is going to an event at Target Center or elsewhere. So it is estimated based on a study a long time ago, and we transfer from the parking fund a stipulated amount every year. It has I think a slight upward slope to it, and it amounts to, it was $3.5 million or so last year. So taken together, the $3.5 million from the parking revenues, somewhere between $1.2 million and $2 million of entertainment tax, and team rent of $1.35 million, you have $5 or $6 or $7 million that funds the operating subsidy and the capital investments for that year pursuant to the budget process. That is the status quo. Just the third piece, the new, is if we proceed with the renovation project and bond for that, we would introduce the hospitality taxes as the source just to pay the debt service on the existing or the new bonds to be issued later this year.
And Mr. Chair, so that additional expense from this new agreement would be an additional approximately $5 million a year, I think I understand from our discussion.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember River, yes, that's correct. That's our current estimate. Interest rates when we sell will be the prime determinant of whether that's 4 or 6.
So what I'm understanding is if you take the best case scenario where we have the smallest amount of outputs and the most amount of income, that would give us $6.5 million in direct expenditures annually and $6.8 million in income annually directly related to this if you assume the parking estimate is correct. But then we're adding an additional $5 million expense per year. So where would the $5 million or additional benefit come from? Why would we make this investment? How are you estimating that the city would recuperate those additional annual expenses?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, the basic economic principle from the city's financial condition is that this is an arena similar to the convention center that contributes to economic activity that manifests itself in a lot of different ways, not always able to be precisely captured, that lead to economic benefits through sales taxes and restaurant taxes and other local taxes, as well as the entertainment tax itself, that would allow us to provide resources to support the arena without compromising our ability to make other priority decisions. It is true that the council will always have the prerogative to use the future capital maintenance questions in the arenas, just like at the convention center, as a big swing factor about where we choose to invest in the future.
And what would happen if, to the previous action that the council took in 2013, if this council does not approve this new proposal?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, excuse me, the action the council took in November of 2013 did two primary things that relate to the modification. It approved the term sheet and it authorized staff to execute a renovation agreement pursuant to those terms. The modifications, in effect, changed the term sheet. We have not yet executed any renovation agreement, and this action would authorize us to go forward and execute a renovation agreement consistent with the newly modified terms.
So just to make sure that everyone's clear on this and that I'm clear on this, this council could decide not to do a significant renovation of the Target Center if it chose to do that. We have no contract that says we are committing to $50 million or $75 million or $100 million renovation.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bember, I don't know if the clerk's office or the city attorney would like to weigh in on this. The staff does have existing authorization to execute a renovation agreement under the prior approved terms. That would not be revoked by this action. It would sit on the books. Whether there is a deal to be done under those terms is a separate discussion.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional questions, comments for staff to respond to? Not seeing any. I wondered if the council president or Councilmember Fry would like to make any comments. I know this, Councilmember Fry, you mentioned to me earlier you were hoping to make a comment as it relates to something that's going on in your ward. Oh, yes. Let me do that. Thank you, Council Vice President. Just to get this out for comment and conversation, I would like to move this action as presented on the agenda so we can have it out in front of us, so it's formally moved and on the table. So, Councilmember Fry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in support of this renovation, and I guess there's one piece that I want to make exceedingly clear, and that's the difference between the Vikings Stadium debate that we had 3 years ago when many of us were not on the council, and this project today. And the primary difference is that we own this building. This is an asset in the city's coffers presently. And, you know, we do have two decisions right now. We can choose not to make what I believe to be necessary improvements, or we can let the building fall further into decay. We can do nothing. And both of them are legitimate alternatives. You can do both. I do feel strongly that it's necessary to make the renovations. This building is in maybe the second or the third worst condition of arenas of its type in the entire country. And even without the necessary investments, it falls among the top of its class in terms of revenue. And, you know, even if you take the Timberwolves out of the equation, there's a wide array of different events that do come to downtown during the weekends and during the week as well that have a tremendous benefit to the businesses, the bars, and the restaurants in the area. I can't remember the guy's name, but who's the country music? Garth Brooks. This is so embarrassing that the council president is Garth Brooks was here for, what was it, 10 days or 11 days. And, you know, it was very clear that there was activity occurring downtown. And that had absolutely nothing to do with the Timberwolves. So, is it an additional investment? Is it a form of subsidy? Yes, it is, because as Mr. Carpenter pointed out, while our revenues do cover the expenses, they would not cover the additional $5 million or whatever it is per year. I do think it's worth it, though.
Thank you for that. Councilmember, or Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for letting me speak in your committee. I think it is really important to realize what this facility brings to our downtown. It increases the vibrancy. Last night, there were 13,000 people that saw Stevie Wonder. I'm sure you know who Stevie Wonder is. Okay, all right. He's really old. He's like my age. But anyway, 13,000 people came to see him. Garth Brooks this summer was a huge hit in the Target Center. And of course, Mr. Carpenter is right. I mean, we can quantify the revenues that happen inside the building, but we can't quantify or we can't specifically quantify the fact that out of those 13,000 people, a few of them ate dinner in our downtown. Maybe some people even stayed in hotels in our downtown to go to that show. And that is part of what it takes to have a downtown that people want to visit, want to live in. If we were to have a downtown, I mean, if we were going to say, well, entertainment doesn't belong, we shouldn't have any entertainment, then we should be tearing our theaters down too. It takes investment, it takes excitement, it takes things going on in our downtown to bring people down to visit our city. The other thing that I want to say is this particular suite of enhancements that will happen because of this new investment includes things that are going to make our bottom line better because it includes things that make our building, as Councilmember Fry said, more operationally usable. Right now, there's one loading dock. If you notice, if you drive in downtown, if you go down 7th Street, that's where the semis park as they're waiting to load and unload. It's an inefficient way to bring shows. These days, some of those shows have 20 semis in and out of the building. And so there'll be more ability to get shows in and out faster. And it makes, that's what our staff has been doing, sitting at the table saying, with the Timberwolves and AEG saying, these are the things we want to see happen in the building with these investments because it's going to make our bottom line better. And the Timberwolves are making their case for what they need to see happen. So we will have a building that will be much more attractive. As Councilmember Fry said, you only have to walk over there and look at the door handles, everything. When you walk in there, it needs work, and it contributes to the vibrancy of our downtown and makes people want to visit our city. And last year, I can't remember the exact number, but in Billboard's estimation of most visited venues, we were in 17, I think, number 17 in the world. So it's not like nobody's going there. We are going to put dollars in, if we pass this action, put dollars in that will make it a more viable and vital part of our downtown and increase those numbers for us. So I encourage my colleagues to approve this today and get us moving so that we can have this project go. And I just want to say something too. I represent a lot of people that work in the industries that staff these buildings. They work multiple places. I ran into a friend of my daughter's from high school when I had the kids at dance. And I said, oh, what are you doing, Talia? And she said, well, I have 3 jobs, or she has 4 jobs, actually. She is the caretaker of the apartment that she lives in, so she gets her rent reduced because of that. She works the call center it was at the Metrodome, actually, before they tore the Metrodome down. She works security at the Target Center, and she works security at Target Field. So there are people who make their living that way, And a lot of those people live in our city. And so I think we need to be respectful of that as well. Those are union jobs in every single one of those facilities. The people that are the concessionaires have agreements with the labor unions. Those are jobs that not all of us are engineers, and not professors. And so people make their living working in these facilities. And I think we have to remember that as well.
Thank you very much for those comments, Council President. I was reminded of some statistics that just demonstrate the value beyond just taxes collected, because there are 200 full-time employees, 700 part-time Target Center employees. This renovation would be talking about more than 800 construction jobs, and it does contribute a great deal of tax base, not just to the hospitality taxes, but also generates about $10–15 million in state and local taxes annually. So those are just important items to mention. I just also wanted to clarify a couple things. Yes, we have about 200 large crowd events per year at Target Center. And that's outside, of course, the Timberwolves and Lynx events. And that's 1 million visitors per year. And 13% of those are from outside of Minnesota. And 70% of all visitors are coming from outside of Minneapolis. So this is a way to certainly express, as Council President Johnson indicated, the vitality that it takes to run a world-class city. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't be supporting this going forward, and I think staff, if you accepted the notion that we needed to have a venue like this downtown and that it was a good return on investment for the city, I think staff did a great job of negotiating a deal, and I think that this deal has improved us not taking on the additional liability and risk related to financing the entire deal ourselves. I disagree with that underlying premise that this is a good investment for the city, because there is a wide body of research that looks at the economic impact of stadiums and concert venues. And in my reading of that body of research, I am not convinced that it is a good return on investment. I think it is a big risk for us to say on what I would actually call a depreciating liability, not an asset, because it doesn't make money. It costs money to run today. That we're taking additional risk in adding more financial risk and liability to the city in the hope that it's generating enough sales tax revenue to pay us back. And I think, what is the alternative to doing this? I know there's some discussion about this in the CD committee, which I was able to watch. In my mind, it would be a perfectly reasonable alternative scenario for us to go forward with our existing, smaller loss annually until this building fulfills its lifespan. And then, I would like to know, I didn't get a chance to ask staff this, how much is the land worth that this is on in downtown Minneapolis? I mean, I would actually think it would be totally reasonable alternative scenario to, throughout the next, until 2025, maintain this building. And then in 2025, take a look at what is a better use for this land in the heart of downtown. Perhaps it would be office or residential use that would directly contribute to our property tax revenue annually and would add a lot of people downtown who I would imagine would also eat and drink in restaurants, bringing back in that sales tax as well. I would argue, based again on my understanding of regional economic development, and that would be a better scenario for us, that would be a less risky scenario, a more certain scenario for our financial health. So that's where I'm coming from. I do appreciate staff's hard work on this. I know a lot of people have been involved in this for a long time, but that's where I'm coming from.
Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to, express my opinions on this. In 20 years, I will be about 58 years old, and in 20 years, these sorts of stadiums will cost probably in the $1 billion mark, and I don't want my kids to be paying $1 billion for a stadium like this. And I think at this point, it makes the most sense for us to invest in the Target Center as is at this point, because we own the place, and it's very different from us talking about building a new stadium for a football team or a soccer team or any other team that we would be subsidizing that. But at this current state, we own the Target Center, and we have an obligation to try to fix it and make it better. And if this extends the life of the Target Center and it makes it that much more of a world-class facility, that would be a good thing. I heard Councilmember Goodman's I want to call it a speech at the end about making clear to folks that, I mean, I won't repeat what she guys to say, but, I would just say, I shared the sentiments exactly. I mean, I'm not a pro-stadium type of person in the sense that I don't want public subsidies to go into stadiums. But in this situation, I think it's very different in the sense that we own this place. We have to fix this place up. And so I will be supporting this. I think that, it's a good thing for us because if we don't do this and if we wait until 2032 and we decide to just raise this, I mean, that generation might have to look at the next iteration of a Target Center. And if they build it, I mean, it's going to be in the $1 billion mark. And I certainly don't want my kids to have to pay for that sort of thing. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to do it now. When you talk about the cost for this renovation, we have a $50 million commitment. It's a contractual commitment that we have to put in. If we fix it now and we do it for the $24.5 million, maybe give or take, several $1 million, but still, I mean, if we're under that $50 million, I mean, we're ahead. So it makes a lot of financial sense to go with it now. And that's why I will be supporting this.
Thank you, ma'am. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, this is the building that I think us in Minneapolis, we love to hate the Target Center. And there's been a lot of debates up here over the years about how do we properly invest in this. And of course, I think almost everyone up here are people that came after the decision was made to own the Target Center, that the city of Minneapolis owns the Target Center. But that's the reality that we are living in, is that we do own this asset. And I do believe it is an asset. It's interesting when Councilmember Frye talked about how aged this facility is and the updates that are needed, and yet still it ranks as high as it does in terms of kind of world rankings and national rankings and kind of being up there in the top 50 or close to that for how many events it pulls every year. And that is a lot of activity. When we first made the decision in 2013 to move forward on updating the Target Center, we had a lot of conversation, and I will say, although there was a lot of consternation on the council about investment in the Viking Stadium and people on different sides, there was really, I think, almost unanimous support from the council. This was a good path to move forward. It was a pragmatic path. It was one where we saw that we were going to invest in a facility and find a way to make it earn its lifespan even farther than we ever thought it would last. And I think that clearly we have gotten caught in market issues with the cost of construction and other elements that have made that original deal not able to move forward. But I still think that this is a pragmatic solution. It is one that allows the facility to operate at a high quality, bring these events into downtown. And I do think it's a legitimate debate for people to have different ideas about what to do with this space. I appreciate that Councilmember Brender has brought different ideas into the mix, but I think to really seriously consider those ideas, especially at this moment when we're making the decision, frankly, it's a multi-year process to really understand what we would be putting at risk if we didn't decide to do this investment, because I think that's a risk too, quite honestly. It's a risk of what we might be caught, as Councilmember Yang said, in a greater investment some years down the future. It's a risk in not understanding what the market might look like in 20 years when it might not be as hot as it is right now, and this would not be an ability to kind of turn over this property, have the probably astronomical expense of demolishing this property and then figuring out how you're going to market it for office and retail. So I think it is good for us to dream big, but we have to have the timeline to do it properly. And I think we're just not at that moment to do that right now. I think this is the right solution, and it's a good one for the city. So thank you to those who worked on, frankly, a very difficult task of trying to put together the best deal possible for the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's definitely an aged facility. For the better part of a decade, I walked through the Target Center every day, to my job at Target Corporate, and it definitely seems like if we're keeping the Target Center, it's time to renovate. And it does obviously have a positive impact downtown. It brings people down there for events and all sorts of things. I guess some of my concerns I'll just lay out here. So I read late last week that the Vikings are contributing another $19.5 million on the Vikings Stadium. And so far they've contributed about 52% to that project, over $500 million for a government-owned facility. And I know that the Timberwolves kicked in half of the contributions along with AEG for our first part of the renovation. I guess I'm a little surprised that for this additional amount, it is no longer essentially equal in terms of contributions for this 24.5 that is being sought. So that is one concern I just want to throw out there. The other is around timing. I've spoken with developers around construction projects and developments in my ward, and they've said quite candidly, you know, we just can't make it economically work outside of downtown, outside of North Loop, outside of University, outside of parts of Uptown without government subsidies, without affordable housing trust fund dollars, without transit-oriented development, because due to the construction of the stadium, so many laborers are working there and so many orders are being taken in for concrete and steel and all of this that it's driven prices up. So I went out to Jones, Lang, LaSalle and read their latest construction outlook, and Minneapolis is actually the third highest construction cost in the nation. We're just behind Chicago and New York City. And so my concern is, by moving forward at this time when already developers are not able to make the numbers work essentially because of all the construction demand, why are we adding more demand that's just going to make private investment that much harder? And so potentially I understand the arguments for doing it now versus holding off, but I think that that's something to be considered in general as well. In terms of the 24.5 million, I think we've spent enough already. So I'm not going to support that. I know that if we didn't move forward with the 24.5, staff are already authorized to renovate the facility. I'm sure that that would solve a lot of the different issues. I believe a lot of this, and I could be wrong here, but is for the external work on the Target Center. And ultimately, it amounts to, over the next 20 years, $1.2 million more per year that would go into our general fund if we didn't move forward with the 24.5. So that's where I'm at, and I think that we have a lot of different priorities in the city that we need to take care of. I was actually talking with Steve Kotke on Friday. I believe he mentioned we're at about a $15 to $20 million per year shortfall for basic road maintenance. And I think that I'd rather see the 1.2 million a year for the next 20 years go to that than touching up the outside of the building and some of the other fine improvements to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter, I don't know if there were any questions or you could respond to, but no need to. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Palmisano, did you have a?
Sure. I feel like I'm reiterating, so I'll let me be brief. I just wanted to say I appreciate the work over many back and forths to get the right upgrade, the right pragmatic amount of upgrade to this project. This isn't one of the billion-dollar renovations that other cities are doing right now. I think there's a big picture here, and not all the costs and benefits are considered, nor are they all in the RCA. But I especially like the reduction of future obligation for this project. We won't be a bank and encumber bonding obligations as we do currently if we don't do anything right now. So I like that future unencumbrance of future councils. They will have more say to this, and I will be supporting this motion.
Yeah, thank you very much. Not seeing any further comments or questions for staff, but I do want to take a moment to say how important I believe this is from a timing point of view. We need to get forward. If we'd like to have a renovation, which of course we have an obligation to do, the only way to bring this forward is to put in an additional $24.5 million from the city's side. That comes, of course, with a reduction in what we're going to be doing in future obligations. So I think it's a low-cost, efficient way to do that, that will allow us to create a facility that will be increase its competitive advantages and take advantage of all of the opportunities for economic development that we see in the future. I think the extension of the lease terms by AEG as well as the teams really provides us an opportunity to also spread that cost out a little bit further over time, which makes it a much more financially palatable solution to do something that's really important and big and consistent with what we're doing, because we do own the building. So with that is the end of my comments. Of course, invite any other last words, not seeing any. On this item, all those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Those item does carry 4-2. Okay, I think our next item is what's the label of this? It's number 37 on our agenda, about the Community Investment Fund, Innovation Fund. I'm sorry, Mr. Blinn.
Mr. Chair and council members, first of all, you have two items before you today. One is approval of the guidelines for the Community Innovation Fund. The second is amending an appropriation for the NCR budget. And since this went to the HECE last week, that second item has been determined not to be necessary. I think you may have an amendment before you on that. I'll give a brief overview of the program, some of the history and the guidelines themselves. I'll try not to repeat what we talked about last week at the HECE. This program, the Community Innovation Fund, came out of a document called the Framework for the Future, which was adopted, or at least presented to the council in 2008. And it's a companion piece to the existing community participation program. And where that program provides funding on a formula basis to neighborhood organizations, the CIF would be a competitive funding program. As currently written, neighborhoods have to apply and compete for funding. And the guidelines were developed by the NCEC after a fairly extensive series of discussions with community meetings and neighborhood groups. And the NCEC, much like the One Minneapolis Fund, would review the applications and make recommendations. Excuse me. So in short, the program is a companion piece of the community participation program and would be reviewed by the NCEC. So I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Councilmember Yang has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Blinn, with regards to this innovation fund, I mean, what are neighborhood groups supposed to innovate?
Mr. Chair and council member, that is a good question. The initial proposal in the Framework for the Future directed this program to identify city priorities through which neighborhoods would respond with presumably innovative projects. The priorities, such as they are in the guidelines, involve all of the city goals that this council adopted last year. So it's fairly broad, and the Neighborhood Community Engagement Commission wished to keep it broad for this first year so as not to exclude any projects that neighborhoods might have.
And Mr. Blinn, let me ask you, one of the aims of the program is to provide funding for projects which test concepts in neighborhoods which may later be replicated throughout the city of Minneapolis. And, I think that's an admirable goal, but, do we have a process to pull the plug on any neighborhood groups who receives the funding who are doing things against the city's interests?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember, if you're asking, through this program, were we to provide funding to a neighborhood for a specific project, and if it was later determined to be counter to, yes, we could. In our funding agreements with these groups, first of all, I think it's unlikely that that would occur, but in the funding agreements, we would have the ability to terminate funding should the project veer off course from what they originally proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just to put this out in front, I would like to move the Community Innovation Fund, approving the guidelines as in item A, and I would like to remove item B. As Mr. Blinn mentioned earlier, after conversations with finance staff, there is a funding source that's been identified within the existing NCR budget. So a change to our appropriation resolution is not needed. So we'll be removing B and considering the guidelines from the SIF. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to be clear, you just moved A forward, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I have a motion to, and maybe I'll ask for your directions just on this from a technical or legislative standpoint, but a motion to amend the eligible applicants in the fund guidelines for the item for Community Innovation Fund to read eligible applicants, one or more recognized neighborhood associations and or community-based nonprofit organizations located in the city of Minneapolis. And this is something that we've talked with staff about in the coordinator's office and the mayor's office and have support all around for.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Yang. Oh, left over. I'm sorry. Council Vice President. This is on the amendment.
On the amendment. So thank you, Councilmember Johnson, for bringing this forward. I understand it was a point of some conversation at the committee. And I don't have any opposition to this idea. It sounds like a way to move forward on the city's already stated goals of trying to broaden the ways that we engage with organizations that serve a variety of residents. My only question is whether there might be a benefit. I'm not sure there's a timing push on getting this done right now, and I'm just wondering about an opportunity maybe to have this be a touch base back to the NCEC, just because that seems to be kind of our formula for actions, and clearly they haven't been part of this discussion, and so I just wanted to raise that as an option. I haven't talked about it with other committee members, and I don't know if Mr. Rubador wants to comment either on whether that's possible or what he thinks would be the benefit gained from that or not. So,
Mr. Rubador, do you have a comment to Councilmember Johnson's proposed amendment to the guidelines from an NCEC perspective?
Chair Quincy and council members, good afternoon. As Councilmember Johnson mentioned, he's been working with our office as well as the mayor's office around this particular amendment. I would say that the department supports this amendment as it's presented. We had a long discussion with the HEC committee last week about our blueprint for equitable engagement, which is all about continuing to support neighborhood organizations, but also looking for creative ways to use funding to get more engagement into the city and using other community partnerships in order to be able to do that. And I think the amendment that he puts forward does meet that intent, even though the blueprint isn't adopted policy yet. It's clearly the direction we've been working on and moving in for the last couple of years. So I'm in strong support of this particular amendment. To Council Vice President Glidden's standpoint, we have not sent this back to the NCEC. This is a relatively new development. The NCEC did review the guidelines up to the point of the presentation to the HEC committee, but they have not had a chance to relook at this particular amendment. We could do that, and we could send it back to them. It would add another month or two to the process. If the council feels ready to move forward, you could move forward today also.
Thank you. Does it address your question, Vice President?
right. So I'm not sure that I heard any recommendation either way from Mr. Rubador. And so if that's the case, I mean, so I just want to make sure if that's the case, then I think we would just move forward. But that's why I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Chair Quincy and Council Vice President Glidden, there is no urgency to this particular adoption. So if the committee feels that time is not of the essence here, we could easily take this back to the NCEC for review and send it back. Again, the NCEC spent about a year putting this together. They have pretty fully vetted it through. However, this is a new piece, so if time's not a consideration, it would probably be a good idea to send it back. So,
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just I had a concern about Council members Johnson's amendment, only because I didn't want it to be perceived that outside community-based nonprofits would be competing with neighborhood associations. But then I realized it really didn't. This doesn't change the funding decisions or the recommendations that would be coming from NCEC. I know that those recommendations would be coming forward after a great deal of effort and reviewing the actual applications. And collaboration is certainly something that's emphasized in the NCEC's proposal. So I don't think it really does any damage to that or puts any undue restriction on the decision-making body, which would be the council as well as the recommending group. Councilmember Johnson, if you'd like to address a question, I think I'd want to point out we've been joined by Councilmember Gordon.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll defer to Councilmember Gordon if he has any thoughts on this as well.
I guess I will do that. How about that, Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I was just hoping that this would be moved forward. I think that this program is ready and the guidelines are sound, and I understand there was a small, we needed to clarify the funding stream more specifically. So I just came in here to make sure everything was moving along smoothly.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Johnson?
And I would just agree with that. I think it is something we can move forward with. And I just think it's a positive change as well to broaden the number of folks who are bringing forward their best ideas so that we'll have even more to choose from and that we can fund some really great work, hopefully.
Okay. With that, let's have a quick vote on the amendment as presented by Councilmember Johnson on eligible applicants. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item's carry. So not seeing any further discussion, the underlying motion then is remains on item number A, the approval of the guidelines as amended, and deleting item B from the report. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? That item carries. So I believe that concludes our business today. Thank you very much for your hard work from staff, from all views. And Diana's not saying we have anything else, so we are adjourned. Thank you very much.